Question. Can an I am presence of a fallen being on our planet Earth slip, slide or fall into a lower vibrational frequency due to their unwillingness to cut ties and or otherwise dissolve an extension of itself embodied in this physical quadrant of mind? That is currently engaged in actively accelerating the downward spiral of the planet. What type of laws and or ascended master policies embedded into the creation of this particular sphere governs this? Well, the short answer to the question is no. And that's because the laws or principles defined by the ascended masters is that an I am presence is created in the lower spiritual realm. And it cannot fall. It cannot descend into duality. That's why the I am presence doesn't take embodiment in an unascended sphere. That's why the I am presence sends an extension of itself, what I call the conscious you, into embodiment. I explained this in more detail in my video about how the world was created. So the whole idea is that the I am presence is having experiences through the conscious you. And whatever experience the conscious you is having, the I am presence turns it into a positive experience. It's learning a positive lesson from it. I know this is difficult to grasp with the outer linear mind when you look at the suffering on earth and what some fallen beings have done. Now, how can there be a positive lesson from the Holocaust, for example? I understand this is difficult to grasp. But the thing is, we can't, I used to try and understand this intellectually, and I realized you can't understand it with the intellectual linear mind. But you can you can connect to the fact that your I am presence is learning a positive lesson from whatever the conscious you is experiencing here on earth. But the other thing that explains this situation is another principle of the Ascended Masters, or another law, you might say, cosmic law, is that free will has to be allowed to play itself. So when the I am presence sends an extension of itself, that conscious you must be given a very long time span, or very broad freedoms to exercise free will at that level. Because you have two levels of free will. You have the free will of the I am presence, and you have the free will of the conscious you. And so the I am presence uses its free will to create an extension of itself. But it must give that extension free will to make choices down here based on its experience of the world of form, or the unascended sphere rather. And as I've said in other videos, there can come a point where the I am presence can override the free will of the conscious you, and it can withdraw the conscious you. There can also come a point where the conscious you decides that it no longer wants to be conscious. It no longer wants to have experiences. Or that it has created so much karma for itself that it doesn't want to balance it. It has created such a complex psychology of these subconscious selves that it doesn't want to dissolve them. So there are scenarios that can play out where a being can decide to end what is happening with the conscious you as a fallen being, when the conscious you has fallen. But you also have to realize that when a conscious you has fallen and becomes a fallen being, as we call it, and again I explained this in my video, How the World Was Created, then it's no longer just a matter of the fallen being deciding how long it's going to exist. It's also a matter of other beings, other conscious yous, who use their free will to make themselves followers of that fallen being. So as I've explained before, you had, in previous spheres, you had some planets where a certain being had become the leader of that planet, the undisputed dictatorial, all-powerful leader on that planet. And when that being decided to fall into the next sphere, there were many of the inhabitants of that planet that followed it out of loyalty. And so the fact that a fallen being can exist for a long time is also because it gives these other beings more and more opportunities to overcome that loyalty, to begin to question it, and therefore take responsibility for themselves. Because when you follow somebody, you're not taking responsibility for your free will, exercising your free will. So, there are many considerations that play into how long can a fallen being be allowed to exist. But ultimately, of course, you can say that the free will of the I Am Presence can stop the spiral, the free will of the conscious you can stop the spiral, but if they don't, then it can be the free will of other people who have followed that fallen being that determines how long it can continue in the fallen consciousness. And often the I Am Presence sees that these other beings who followed its own conscious you, they need more opportunities. And so it allows itself to still have that fallen conscious you in embodiment, so to speak, in order to give them that opportunity. And so I hope this didn't create more confusion, but it's just what you realize when you start really thinking about this and studying the teachings of the Ascended Masters is that, the ego always wants to simplify everything and have these clear-cut answers. This is the way it should be, the ego thinks, because the ego always has this idea of how the universe should work. But when we start really understanding more, we realize, because of free will, things are very, very complex. And there are so many scenarios, where the Ascended Masters can clearly see what would be the simplest way for a being to return to the ascended, or to ascend, to return to a higher level of consciousness. But free will must be allowed to apply itself. So you see, for example, Earth. Earth is a planet that's not a natural planet, and this has been allowed in order to give people who are embodied here an opportunity to grow. And there are many, many things, many times where things shift in the world based on this. This is actually what the Buddha described 2,500 years ago with the concept of the interdependent originations, where we tend to look at things from down here, and we look at it, I'm an individual being, maybe even a separate being, and I think the world should work like this, and there shouldn't be suffering and this and that, and masters should take a certain fallen being out of embodiment and this and that. But they look at it from a much broader perspective, a much higher perspective, and they are not looking to produce a specific outer result on Earth. They are looking to raise people's consciousness, both individually and as groups of people, even as humanity as a whole. So they are always looking at a very complex equation, and now something shifted a little bit, and then we give people another opportunity to see what they haven't seen. But then they shift, and now they see something. Now we can give them another opportunity to see something higher. For example, there came a point where many people have started to see the weakness of the European feudal system, where a landlord owned not only the land, but the people who lived on it. And as a result of that, they started immigrating to America. And as a result of that, they came to a state of consciousness where they were ready to take responsibility for themselves as a nation that didn't have the feudal system, but had a democratic state of government. And then democracy was brought into America. And then the shift started broadening so that some of the European nations could free themselves from the feudal system and create democracies. So you see how constantly the equation is shifting. And it's always a matter of looking at what are people ready for, then the masters can release a new idea. Or what does a certain group of people need to outplay in a more extreme form in order to see it, like you often see with war. There's a group of people that need to outplay their aggression, their sense of separation in a more extreme form in order to overcome it, in order to see how absurd it is. You see the Holocaust. Many people around the world, not just the Germans, but many people still today have this sense other people are the problem. They are making other people a scapegoat. If we just could get rid of those other people, then we would solve all our problems. And the Holocaust outpictured that state of consciousness in such an extreme form that it gave people an opportunity to see it. So anyway, I'm rambling on here, but I just wanted to convey that, the situation on Earth with the outplaying of free will is just very complex. And the Ascended Masters are constantly looking at all this complexity, seeing how to help one person, a small group of people, a bigger group of people, and even humanity as a whole come to a higher level of awareness.